World after COVID-19, how it will look like in terms of political, socio and economic perspectives, pandemic preparedness for the next one. Will the current world order change? How can Sri Lanka cope up with it and face the new reality? Are our policymakers and politicians aware of the challenges? Can they live up to the plate? In this series of discussions, we bring various individuals. Today, our guest speaker is Rasika Jayakody from Sri Lanka, a member of the youth group of Samagi Janabalavegaya and a former journalist and a political activist. With that introduction, we will move on to the discussion and we welcome Rasika Jayakody from Sri Lanka. Okay, Rasika, thanks for coming on. It's a very vital, important discussion at this juncture, and with what's happening around the world, and particularly with COVID-19, and since then all the Black Lives Matters and all these other movements that are happening around the world, and people are so anxious with what's going on and how Sri Lanka can fit into this situation, and how even Sri Lankans are grasping this situation. So let's move on to COVID-19. And can you give us a sort of a perspective in general, your view about how the government handled COVID-19 and what is it going to be after COVID-19 and what are your plans and all that kind of stuff, like for our viewers, Rasika?
Yeah, I'll start with how the government handled COVID-19. I think Sri Lanka has contained the spread of the virus to a great degree. Especially, we were able to prevent a community transition, which was a major achievement. But we still find new cases on a daily basis, mainly from the Navy cluster and from foreign returnees. That's why the number is going up. But overall, there's an opinion in our society that the spread of the virus has been contained. Of course, the government did a commendable job. We have to give them that credit for mobilizing the entire state machinery to fight the pandemic, especially the armed forces, the intelligence services, the health sector, and many other state entities were brought into one system. So it was easy to deal with the impact of the pandemic, which was why we were able to handle the quarantine process in a commendable manner, and contact tracing and all that was done with the support of security forces. So the process became more efficient. So the health sector had enough support from all these other entities in the state sector. So the entire government, the entire state machinery, operated as one unit, which is that's why there's relative success in Sri Lanka. But we are not out of the woods yet. But there is progress. But while giving that credit to the government, there are areas where we fail to make progress. One is the Navy cluster. Nearly 800 Navy officers have been infected with the disease. We still don't know how it happened or what led to that situation. We know that the first Navy officer contracted the virus from a person in Suduella during a raid. So after that, it spread to close to 800 people within the Navy. That's considered one of the largest clusters in this part of the world. That's what the JVP and the opposition parties say. I don't have statistics to prove my claim, but it's a large number. So we don't know how it happened, or who's responsible. We don't see a meaningful effort by the government to find out who's responsible and what led to this large cluster. And we have another problem in terms of breaking down returnees, Sri Lankan expatriate workers. So they are stranded in many countries, especially in the Middle East region. They have been asked to leave but Sri Lanka still doesn't have facilities to bring them down and quarantine them. I still don't know why the government finds it difficult to set up quarantine facilities to keep them, because there are so many unoccupied hotels around the country. So there should be a mechanism to bring them into one system and uh, you know use them as quarantine facilities for returnees. But that's not happening, and because of that, there's a lot of there's a fierce debate in the country over how we should handle this matter. The government ministers, when they appear on TV debates, say that we don't have adequate facilities to house them in Sri Lanka, so because of that, we can't bring them down. But it's very clear that Sri Lankan expatriate workers are one of our major, they are one of our major foreign exchange earners, and we rely on them in terms of running our economy. And they overwhelmingly voted in favor of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa. They came down in large numbers to support the president at the last presidential election. So I don't know why the government is turning a blind eye to their plight today. So these are the issues that we are dealing with. At the same time, there's a constitutional problem. Now, Parliament was dissolved on March 2nd. So yesterday, on June 2nd, it completed 3 months. So there hasn't been a parliament in 3 months, and we don't know when the new parliament will be convened again. And the election date is yet to announce. So there's a gray area in terms of whether the government has the president has constitutional authority to spend the state-owned money in terms of COVID-19 relief and all that. There's a gray area. I don't say the president doesn't have authority, but there's a gray area, and interpretation must be obtained from the Supreme Court. But the government has not done that yet for some reason. So because of that, there's a confusion in the country. So those are the main areas that we are dealing with at the moment.
Okay, so while giving that due credit and also discussing the pros and cons and the pluses and minuses in this process, so are you content with the government bringing the army personnel to handle COVID-19? Because in this part of the world, a lot of sections, and we have talked about that, and they think that this will probably lead to a very bureaucratic and also very authoritarian regime in later. And are you content with that?
It comes with a package. There are pros and cons. I think in terms of bringing the entire state machinery into one system to fight the pandemic, it made sense, because in terms of, I mean, they did a good job in terms of contact tracing and all that. Because of that, large number of people were sent into quarantine, and that helped a lot to prevent a community transmission in the country. In terms of that, I think it was a necessary step, because Sri Lanka, the health authorities didn't have the muscle or the necessary resources to go about it, especially contact tracing. But the intelligence services are well trained to handle that kind of operations, and the military has enough resources and manpower to handle that process. In terms of that, it made sense. But there's a flip side to it. That is, how it militarizes the entire society, especially during the early stages of the pandemic. A number of opposition activists were arrested for publishing false content. That's what the government said. False content on social media. I mean, a sizable proportion of them happened to be opposition activists. So there was no way that we could challenge that.
If I interject a little bit, and now you're talking about contact tracing, and that word itself in this part of the world is very, very intrusive, and people think like going forward, even around the world, even the developed world, probably would gear up a whole bunch of applications, software applications to do contact tracing. And is that being discussed in the country now?
Of course, we had a Samagi Janabalavegaya had a press conference yesterday, and we talked about how the government will create a database, a comprehensive database of people. I mean, there's a sizable segment of our society thinks that it's necessary, and it's part of the part and parcel of handling the pandemic. At the same time, we see the threat. We see the threat that will hamper our democracy in the long run. But it's still, the situation is fluid. Our first priority is handling the pandemic. So I don't think we, as an opposition party, uh, we are able to resist the ongoing measures to to fight the pandemic, the technical aspect of it, collecting data, contact tracing, and all that, because we have to give priority to the main issue, which is the pandemic. But going forward, it's very important for the government to manage this system, in a manner that doesn't harm our democracy. So that's going to be our main challenge. Once we are out of it, we have to fight hard for democratic values, for freedom, and for the healthy, the functioning of our state. So that's why I said it's a gray area. It's a new norm and uncharted waters, uncharted territories. So while battling the pandemic, we have to preserve the fundamentals of democracy in this country.
Okay. Now, since this discussion is basically focusing on post-COVID-19 situation, if we refer our economic situation right now in the country, and as a policymaker and as a policy guy that's talking about these things, I would like to talk to you two things. One, before COVID-19, for the last 70 years, right, there were a set of countries that developed the economies through innovation, through various technical innovations and the industrial revolution, etc. And then with Singapore and China, then there were another set of countries that didn't have capability to innovate initially, and then they brought the foreign direct investments to their country, and then let it percolate to the society, and establish whole set of policies like the proper functioning stock market and various other options like the setting up unions and giving the benefits to the working people as well as to the other people. So these two economic models failed in Sri Lanka. They failed, utterly failed. And so can you sort of like shine a light to us that which economic model you guys are thinking and talking right now in the party that may go into work post COVID-19?
That is all about creating a balance between the two models that you talked about. In Sri Lanka, a lot of these economic models failed because the governments were hell bent on, leaders of the respective governments were, successive governments were hell bent on supporting their cronies, supporting their friends. In terms of foreign direct investments, there were there's a massive amount of corruption behind those deals. They were not transparent. And in terms of privatization, there were so many problems. There were so many issues around corruption and malpractices. So there was no transparency. There was no system in this country. And that's what led to this failure. So going forward, I think, at the last presidential election also, if you read our manifesto, we talked about how to create a balance between these two models, how to drive innovation, how to drive new businesses, how to drive startups, how to spend more money, how to allocate more money. for research and development, especially in Sri Lanka. Like 0.1% of our GDP goes into research and development, whereas in a country like Israel, they spend about 4.5%. So that alone shows how bad we are in terms of thinking about innovation and supporting it. We also propose to set up a 10 billion fund for startups, for people who are starting, who are striving to start new businesses, and to create a startup ecosystem in the country, while adopting a transparent process, transparent mechanism to boost FDIs in the country. We can't leave that part out at this juncture. We have to create a balance between the two, between those two aspects. So that's the model suggested by the Samagi Janabalavegaya for the parliamentary election. Also, we are yet to finalize our manifestos and all that.
But Rasika, again, sorry for interjecting a little bit again. When you say you are devising a model that's sort of like a quasi what we had earlier, and a quasi of these two models. Is there sort of a precedence for that model, like a country or some other, basically a country that has sort of that kind of a balanced model?
I think many emerging countries are following the same model, right? So that is what we are looking at. I'm not saying okay, this is completely like Singapore, this is completely like Malaysia or something of that sort. But many emerging countries are trying to strike a balance between these two aspects. There are some countries that are that are focused heavily on entrepreneurship, but Sri Lanka can't achieve success on that front overnight. To create a startup ecosystem, it requires time and effort. You have to nurture the new talent. You have to give more opportunities. You have to be patient. You have to be, you have to give them time and space to build, to develop a startup ecosystem in the country. In many countries that have, successful startup ecosystems, it took a long time for them to develop that. That's the direction in which we should move. But in the process, if we completely shut down the other aspect, that won't work. So from a pragmatic perspective, that's what I can see.
But if I bring this scenario into this discussion, say North America, Canada, and Mexico. It's about 530 million people, and with $19 trillion economy. And the developed Europe is about 750 million people. Not all countries in Europe are developed, and with 14 trillion economy. So we are talking about million people and trillion, over 12 trillion economies. And our region, India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh alone, we're not talking about million, we're talking about billion people. And for years and decades, we had billion people, but still hovering around 2.5 trillion economy. And so from here, being here and looking at that point of view about the region, we see something somewhere is wrong. And because you guys are not thinking, that is why we are looking at that way. You guys are not thinking as a regional powerhouse, how to integrate more regionally. And that's, I guess, the fundamental of SAARC. And so what happened to that concept?
I think during the last government, the UNP-led government, there was a lot of discussion about integrating with India, that regional aspect of it. So that's why there were initiatives to sign an agreement. We signed an a free trade agreement with Singapore after 11 years. That was the first free trade agreement after 2005, 2006. But there was a lot of resistance back home. That's the key issue. Even today, we can't talk about ITCA or the FTA with Singapore. So the public sentiment within the country is not in favor of that sort of seamless integration. So we have to find a new model. We are forced to find a new model that will balance the interests of our people back home, and the economic aspect, the economic interest. So you can't bulldoze the public sentiment and impose uh, these agreements on them. You know what happened with MCC. MCC became a topic during the election. You're talking about 500, close to 500 million US dollars uh, to develop a land segment which remains unregulated for generations. 80% of our lands are owned by the state, and only like 20% are owned by private owners. So the 80% of lands owned by the state are completely underutilized, unproductive. They are not contributing to anything. They are not contributing to agriculture sector. Like 27% of our people are employed in the agriculture sector, but the contribution to GDP is just 7%. So that's the reality. Uh, Regulate that. We need to regulate our lands. We need to streamline our land ownership. We need to create a central database. Still, the government doesn't know the amount of lands that for instance, if you take the Land Reforms Commission, the Reforms Commission doesn't even know the lands they possess, the lands they own.
But the requirement of MCC was not in government agenda at any time, right? Like that was proposed by United States or a separate entity of United States, correct?
That's what proposed. I mean, the government applied for that. The project was designed. The traffic management project and the land digitalization project was proposed by the Sri Lankan government, and they applied for this grant. And then the US selected, and then they supported the implementation of the project, and all that was supposed to be handled by the government. But irrespective of all that, there was massive criticism. There's a strong public outcry against. What I'm saying is that our people are vehemently opposed to that kind of integration. So we need to come up with a model that works in Sri Lanka, that aligns with the interest of Sri Lanka. So you can't drive any reforms without the public support. So that's a fun.
Yeah, that's a very good point you're coming on, and that's something that I need to touch as well. Because even here, even if we are going to build a road, even if we're going to say spend anything on infrastructure and you name it, right? And there is a lot of public anxiety. I wouldn't say like it's not anger and or resistance, right? It's sort of anxiety. And but if you go back to 1960s history in this part of the world as well, like yes, public were always angry and protested on almost everything. The way they sort of like addressed that issue was establishing about now if I take Canada, we have about like 278 think tank companies. And those think tank companies are the companies who basically prepare policies for the government and then for various entities. And those companies also have their political agenda as well, right-wing think tank companies, left-wing think tank companies. So if I want to be a politician, all what I do, my first step will be to retain a think tank company and ask them, hey, what are the issues in this area and how I want to address them, and then gear up my campaign. But there is no such culture in Sri Lanka. Am I correct?
Yes, I think we have a long way to go to get there, and it doesn't work that way in Sri Lanka. In this part of the world, it's especially in Sri Lanka, the mainstream media wields a lot of power over how people think or how people see certain issues. So these media companies, the mainstream media, is largely driven by political agendas of the guys who own them. So the media owners in Sri Lanka are largely affiliated with political parties. So their, the way they report their news is decided or designed by how they by the political affiliations of their owners. So it's very politicized in this country. So even if you take integration, people who protest on the street are not familiar with the content of those agreements. For instance, when the MCC, when they are at the height of that MCC controversy, the previous government actually publicized the agreement that was in the public domain, but no one bothered to read it. No one really took any notice of it. But they went on protesting and conducting hunger strikes and all that. But no one really.
Why the so-called intellectuals in Sri Lanka? Let's say for now, like because you don't have like a proper think tank culture like here, and the so-called intellectuals in Sri Lanka, right, and did not take that initiative to talk about MCC and its pros basically, and everybody was like sending all these innuendos and about MCC, but we didn't see one in social media, the government coming strongly for it.
No, at that point, I think the government, that came the approval was granted just 2-3 weeks before the presidential election. So, if the government, the ruling party, and everyone in the political spectrum were, they were heavily focused on the election. The first thing. The same time, when you talk about intellectuals in Sri Lanka, the intellectual space, there's a clear demarcation, a clear line dividing the common masses and the intellectual space. They speak in two different languages. Our intellectual space, our think tanks, and all these think tank companies. There are some in Sri Lanka, but a lot of these intellectuals speak in a different language. They are more visible in the English media, but the 90% of our population consume their news and information in Sinhala. That's a fundamental difference. But these intellectuals are hardly visible in the Sinhala media, which is consumed by the large majority of our population. So there's a clear division. That's one thing. And also, I don't think our intellectuals understand the pulse of the people, how they think. I mean, they discount the fact that these reforms cannot be implemented without public support. That's a fundamental, the basic tenet of politics. So without understanding that, when intellectuals operate in their own silos, when they operate in their own bubbles, they can't see this reality. And so that's the issue. Our politicians, our intellectuals our think tanks, intellectuals, our politicians, and our public, our citizens, they operate in three different silos. So there's no intersection. There's no common ground where they meet and discuss things.
Rasika, okay, since we have only another about this discussion, another about 6-7 minutes, I would like to expedite with a couple of quick questions here. Now, with post COVID-19, and a lot of people are thinking it will be a post-American world probably, and China will be dominating. And what's your view on that?
I think we need to see how it affects Sri Lanka. So right now, Sri Lanka is in a severe financial crisis, due to obvious reasons. A lot of our major avenues of income, foreign income, are now dysfunctional. Our apparel sector is facing severe challenges. Our tourism sector, we still don't know when the tourism industry will recover from the impact of the pandemic. So we have very limited opportunities. And due to the 2-month lockdown, people don't have money to spend. There are shops and the government is providing certain benefits and facilities for businesses, but people don't have money to consume them. Because of that, there can be a contraction. There will be a contraction in our economy. So in this scenario, the only way out I can see is to get more loans. So the easiest option for the government to go to China, because that's how it has been for many years. So we are already in a debt trap. We are hampered by debt. So I think if this continues and if the government seeks to obtain more loans from China, we will be in a serious trouble. So
What's the way out of it you're suggesting?
I mean, there's no short-term way out. I don't think anyone has devised a short-term way out. Any country has devised a short-term way out. A lot of countries, especially the Europe or the America or other developed countries, they have fiscal space to manage this problem. They have fiscal space to give more benefits to uh, the people. They have fiscal space to support businesses. But in this part of the world, especially a country like Sri Lanka, we don't have that kind of fiscal space. So it's a it's as I told you earlier, it's uncharted territories now. For instance, the apparel sector is now moving into manufacturing PPEs, which is good. And I think we have already supplied to the US and several other countries. Uh, so that is one, but I don't think that will completely mitigate the impact of the issues faced by apparel industry. Tourism sector, we still don't have a plan. I mean, I saw, for instance, South Africa has started uh, virtual safari and things like that, but we still don't have a plan to, proceed with that kind of changes.
What about Rasika? Sorry again, because of the timing, I'm posing these questions very quickly to you, and but you are still very generous with your time as well. But if we still rely on these loans, high interest Chinese loans, the view here is basically these countries, not only Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and even a number of African countries, and are falling into the prey of China. That means Chinese, of course, right? What they had was basically, they were basically, when they started their development cycle, right? They had an intention to knock down the competitive countries, those who are going to compete with them. They had an intention to knock them down. And one way to knock them down is to give these loans to crony, the rulers in those countries and put them in a debt trap. That is one. And the second, still China, if you take the numbers from China, the middle class earners wages that they declare to the outside world is only $259 and $259 a month. And in Sri Lanka, the number is $388. So as an investor, why would I go to Sri Lanka for $388, which has more political chaotic political situation? I would rather go to China. So this whole situation plays very well into their narrative. And now if you're thinking like, if we are still relying on Chinese loans or maybe other loans, we will have no way out of it. As a matter of fact, right, I just was asking, now, what if we are bold and start talking about a defaulting debt?
I don't think I don't think it's being discussed here as an option, and I'm not sure what repercussions it will entail in the long run.
The Greece did it, and what they did basically, it was a basket case, right? And when we compare the overall, the global economy, Greece was also termed as a basket case. So what they did, like they initially threatened the world, hey, we are going to default. So if somebody has given you a loan $100, right, instead of not getting it back 100%, then I would basically slash my number and I would say, okay, give me $50. And initially they had those series of steps to reduce the debt, negotiated very well, and then brought it to a manageable level. So why not discuss?
I think Sri Lanka will take a different approach in that regard. For instance, even before the COVID, this pandemic, the Prime Minister went to India and asked for a 3-year moratorium on Indian loans. So I think Sri Lanka will take a more gentle path in that sense. They will negotiate. In a worst case scenario, they will negotiate with certain countries, but that won't be a sustainable solution given the situation we are in. So that's the problem. I think we have two. I think we have very limited options in this regard. That is to cut down expenditure in the state sector drastically. I mean, that is not limiting the import of vehicles or ministers or not cutting down ministries. Those limitations are not contribute a lot. The crisis is far bigger. So seriously rethink how we run the state sector. Seriously rethink how we do our expenditure in the state sector and cut down drastically. But this will create serious repercussions, serious political repercussions, and the public, especially in terms of welfare measures, there will be a serious turmoil on the ground. So the government will have to manage that. The next option is to get more loans from China, which seems to be the easy option for the government at this juncture. But that will also further push us down in this debt trap, and there won't be a way out after that. It will help us survive the day, the next 24 hours. But what happens after that is beyond me, beyond anyone. So those are the problems Sri Lanka is facing right now, and the government is not communicating to the public. For instance, there's when oil prices in the global market dropped, we saved we saved a serious amount of money in terms of oil imports, but the government didn't inform, they communicate to the public as to how much they saved and how that money was utilized in the country. I mean, these are the issues that we have to talk about.
Okay, thanks, Rasika. And one another quick thing that I would like to touch on with the limited time we have here is the 5G technology. The 5G is a major breakthrough for many countries, and we know that the United States and China are fighting over 5G. And I can imagine with the security agreements like Canada has with the United States, the UK and Australia, and most of the European countries have with the United States. I can imagine that probably they would go with the United States, while there are so many other countries like Sri Lanka and a bunch of other countries that they don't have that kind of an agreement with the United States. And so they may have to select and which technology they would be going with equipment they would be allowing to use in the government security apparatus. And what is your guess?
I really don't know how the government is trying to go about it, because there are so many issues for instance, last week, one of the directors who appointed to ICTA, the apex tech body of the government, resigned. Sanjay Veeravarna, who's well known in the IT industry and who's considered a tech leader in this country. He resigned, saying that the government there's no strategic direction in the IT sector, and they are purchasing 20-year-old technology at exorbitant prices. So that was his main argument. And when the president appointed a star-studded, tech panel to head the ICTA, there's a lot of interest. There's heightened interest and enthusiasm in the country, saying, okay, finally we are in the right direction. But now, these cracks have appeared. So given these issues, I don't know how the government is trying to approach this, because there's no clarity. They're not communicating to the public. So without clarity, you can't guess anything, because anything is possible in this country. As I told you, the same applies to the oil prices. Same applies to how the government spends money from the consolidated fund. There's no clarity. There's no transparency. So we can't think of, when people in the policy space, they can't think, they can't guess, they can't assume what's going to happen without that kind of vital information. So that has created a smoke screen where anyone can get away with anything.
Okay, and now you being in another front of the Samagi Janabalavegaya, and can you tell us whether you all are discussing these things, and whether there's a mechanism to discuss all this within the party, and how are you operating?
Yes, now we have already, Samagi Janabalavegaya has already appointed committees to come up with recommendations, come up with proposals to power certain vital segments in the economy. We already had one meeting for the agriculture sector. It's a committee attended by former parliamentarians and professionals in the agriculture and innovation sector, how to use innovation to drive agriculture, to drive the productivity in the agriculture sector. And there's a similar committee for youth affairs, and I'm also involved in that committee, and we are talking about how to power the youth segment of our society to especially in terms of giving them opportunities, education, and so on, political representation, and many other matters. So, like that, we have appointed committees to look into various segments of our society and come up with proposals that will be incorporated into our manifesto. So, we are in the process of, examining that. And Samagi Janabalavegaya is also negotiating, also discussing with policy experts. We have professionals who are working with us. So they will also give the inputs, and all of it will come together in the next couple of weeks, especially in the run up to the election.
But your leader, I guess Sajid Premadasa, right? And he was not discussing any of this stuff while he was in the previous party, correct? I was not following very much Sri Lankan politics on that front, but did he discuss all this stuff when he was in the UNP?
He discussed these things widely when he was running for the presidency. But the thing is, now I attended a number of discussions attended by him, with business leaders, with professionals, with that segment of our society. But what you see on this mainstream news is that what he says during rallies. So there's a gap in terms of reporting these issues. I mean, especially these policy elements were not reported at all. I mean, to be in fairness to Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa, the same happened to him. So our media space is not very is not geared to discuss these wide-ranging policy issues. Our media space is very much about these day-to-day stories that will get them more eyeballs. So because of that, people don't know whether whether these things are discussed in within the political circles, and that's a problem.
Sorry, Rasika, again, sorry to interject again because of the timing, and I'm glad that you came on, and also I'm glad that as a young person getting involved with the politics anyway in Sri Lanka, and how can you just to wrap up this discussion for our viewers, can you sort of like summarize what is post COVID-19 going to be for you, basically?
Well, I think we are now talking about this new normal. I think going forward, we have to prepare for this kind of pandemics. For instance, over the past few decades, this kind of pandemics of this magnitude was not on our radar. We didn't see these things coming. But today we are faced with a serious issue, serious pandemic that has stopped the entire world. The entire world, about nearly 200 countries. So going forward, we need to have systems to deal with this kind of problems. We need to have systems to distribute money in the face of a severe global pandemic. We need a system to utilize the resources in our state sector, utilize the resources in the private sector. In the face of a pandemic of this scale. So I think going forward, our main focus should be to come up with those systems. It's not limited to Sri Lanka. I think other countries in the world are also forced to rethink how they govern the country, rethink how they assess their risks, rethink how they manage their risks. So going forward, that's going to be one of our main challenges. The next new parliament, I think today, hopefully the new election date will be announced. After that, the elections commission has said they required nearly 60 to 70 days to conduct the election according to the new health and safety regulations. So we'll see whether, yesterday there was a mock election in Ambalangoda. So hopefully the election will take place in 2 months from now. So that's going to be one of the major tasks of the new parliament, prepare the country for this kind of problems.
Okay, Rasika, thank you very much, and you are very generous with your time, and I really appreciate. And I think we need to have more discussions, more and more discussions like this. And I really appreciate your time and coming on to discuss these things. Thank you.
Thank you very much.